We are going to be doing a simple, basic, but important study on Matthew chapter 7, verses 28 to 29, seeing what it means for Christ to speak with authority. Because in Christianity, we do the exact opposite with pastors, people who teach the Bible, regular Christians, people in the audience of churches. We make this grave mistake that Christ was not doing, and we are going to look at the example of Christ of what we should be doing and what we shouldn't be doing. Matthew chapter 7, verses 28 to 29. And it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. What does it mean for Christ to speak with authority? Notice how it says right after that, and not as the scribes. If you know how the Jews taught in that age, and even in today's age, the way they would validate what they have to say, or the way they would teach, is by quoting other rabbis, quoting tradition. So they would say something and then say, oh, rabbi said this, oh, so-and-so says this, or this tradition says this, in order to validate what they have to say. And we do the same thing even in today's age. When we're writing articles, when we're speaking to people online, we'll say something, and if they disagree, we're like, oh, I don't care what you say. He says this. This person who has authority, he said the same thing as me, so therefore what I say is true no matter what. But Christ did the exact opposite, and what would that actually look like? If you notice the language of Matthew chapter 5, with Christ speaking about the laws of Moses and giving out the true meaning of them, before he would explain what the laws of Moses were, and what their true meaning is, he would start off the phrase with, but I say unto you. The people have never heard someone speak with that much authority by not quoting another tradition, by not saying, oh, Moses said this, or this prophet said this, or this tradition says this. He says, but I say unto you. He was speaking so confident, and he knew what he was saying was true, that he did not need to use a reference to validate what he has to say. But Christian influencers, pastors, people who teach out of the Bible, in order to validate what they have to say, they'll end up quoting someone, referencing someone, like someone in the early church, a church father. Oh yeah, this church father says this. He was in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century. He was near the time of the apostles, so therefore what he has to say is 100% true, so therefore he's almost infallible. Oh, this person in the so-and-so century, his church was from God. Oh, the early church, they were the first church, so therefore they're infallible. And therefore church leaders, influencers, pastors, they'll guilt trip people inside the church, people who are looking up to them, and they say, oh, if you disagree with me, you're not really disagreeing with me, you're disagreeing with the early church, you're disagreeing with this church, you're disagreeing with this tradition. And by that means, millions are led astray. So when people are studying out the Bible, when people are being shown out the scriptures what a doctrine and how false it is, or what this verse or chapter actually means, they end up believing at first, they end up agreeing with what the page actually says, but since their pastor says something different, oh yeah, I can't agree with this. My pastor says something different. Oh, the early church, they didn't agree with this. Oh yeah, it can't be true. Because how can we have the truth, but they're wrong? How do we know better than them? They were with the early church. They were with the apostles. So therefore what they have to say is 100% true. Even if we're showing plainly at the page what it says, we can't be right. And therefore they're led into fanaticism, into believing whatever a person, church, or pastor says, and therefore Matthew 15 verse 14 is exemplified. But now going to Acts chapter 17 verse 10 to 11 on this topic. And the brethren immediately sent away Paul and Silas by night unto Berea, who coming thither went into the synagogue of the Jews. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica, in that they received the word with all readiness of mind, and searched the scriptures daily whether those things were so. Paul, one of the most significant figures inside of the New Testament, and Silas, but yet these people searched the scriptures daily. For what reason? Whether those things were so. They didn't care. Paul, Peter, any of the people who walk with Christ, they were not just going to blindly believe what they have to say. They searched the scriptures to test if what they were saying is true. So how much more us in today's age, our pastor, this Christian influencer, whoever it may be, not just blindly being in a cult following whatever this person says, but checking the scriptures to see if what he is saying is true. And when you end up finding out what this person, this church leader, this pastor or influencer, and what he is saying is incorrect, he is in error, you don't just keep blindly following this person in whatever he says or does. You don't fall into the idea of, oh, well, yeah, there's no way in what I am saying is true. yeah, I have to be incorrect. Yeah, this pastor, this early church, they definitely know way more than me. Even though the page says this, I'm wrong and the page is wrong. I'm going to agree with what this person says about the page. And by many people doing that, they just blaspheme the Holy Spirit. Now going to Galatians chapter 11, verses 11 to 12 and 16. But I certify you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached of me is not after man. For I neither received it of man, neither was I taught it, but by the revelation of Jesus Christ, to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the heathen. Immediately I conferred not with flesh and blood. Paul was so confident and had so much assurance, just like Christ in Matthew chapter 7, that he conferred not with flesh and blood, meaning he didn't ask counsel, he didn't exchange opinions with other people of that time to see if his gospel was an error. Peter, the James, the Lord's brother, you had all these different apostles, people who walk with Christ. He didn't go up to a single one of them to ask them if his gospel was an error. He didn't say, oh yeah, if what I'm saying is incorrect, please let me know. He didn't ask any single one of them. So then when I'm going to the Bible and I'm seeing what the page clearly sets out, but then I turn to my left and I see a church father, then I see a pastor, then I see an influencer, and so says this, and they're saying completely different than what the Bible is saying, who am I supposed to believe? And if you chose that side, then you are completely deceived. But many will never get to that same type of level of confidence and assurance like Christ and Paul had about their gospel and what they were preaching in, because no one searches the scriptures. No one studies the scriptures. In order to have that same type of assurance and confidence that they had, you have to search the scriptures, thoroughly study them until you find out the meaning of it. In order to have that assurance, you have to study it so deeply to where you know 100% what it is talking about. But if you do not study, you won't experience that, and you'll be the rest of your life in ignorance, clapping your hands saying, go pastor, go church leader, I'm going to listen to everything you have to say. What I have to say doesn't matter. I'm going to blindly follow you in what everything you say or do. And that is an example of everyone in Christianity in today's age. And ending it off on this, Matthew chapter 5, verse 20. For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Christ in all his teachings, and especially the Sermon on the Mount, he taught so bold, taught with so much confidence, and it's exemplified within verse 20, in which we read at the very last part of the verse where he said, ye shall in no wise enter into the kingdom of heaven. Who is teaching like that? He said, look, if you don't do this, you can't make it to heaven. People nowadays teach too vague, and they're like, yeah, man, we have to have works, but we don't have to have works to be saved. Yeah, I mean, we should keep the commandments, but it's not required to be saved. But Christ, he spoke so boldly where he's like, you don't do this, you can't make it to heaven. If you do this, you're going to hell. He taught so boldly, and that's why the people had so much reverence. We're in awe of him teaching because he was so confident and bold like how he was. And Christianity will forever stay comfortable in their sin, not having reverence because no one is teaching like this. The pastors are assuring them of their salvation, saying, yeah, man, you're comfortable while sinning. It's all good, man. We all fall into sin every once in a while. Oh, yeah, you have to have works, but it's not required to be saved. And as long as there's teachers like that, millions will be led astray, and that's why many people need to speak with the same authority that Christ and Paul did throughout the whole Bible. In conclusion, I'm not saying that you're supposed to just be fully devoted to your own belief and not exchange opinions and not see other people's opinions on the same verse you guys are reading. But what I am saying is you're not supposed to just believe what anyone else says because they have authority. You're not supposed to believe a church father just because he might have knew the disciples. You're not supposed to believe this person because their church is quote unquote the church of God. You're supposed to get what the page says, not what a man says, not what a church says. The Bible has to say it. And when you don't constantly reference people in order to validate what you have to say, you get that same type of confidence and authority that Paul and Christ had. People respect you a lot more when you just say it, instead of just constantly saying, oh, so-and-so said this, so therefore what I'm saying is true. And that's a lot of trap people, and especially church leaders, follow into, because a lot of them know they're in error, but since they'll quote a church father or quote a tradition in order to validate what they have to say. Even if you tell them they're wrong, they're not going to believe you. They already have their beliefs made up. And they're just going to say, oh, this person said this tradition says this has authority, so therefore you're not disagreeing with me, you're disagreeing with them. And that is complete delusion.